Well, good morning everyone, and welcome back to our little home on wheels. For those of you who are new here, I'm John, this is my brilliant wife, Karen, and for the last 3 years, this camper van, christened the Wanderer, has been our entire world. We're a couple of 50-somethings who decided that the corner office and the suburban mortgage weren't the grand prizes we'd been led to believe. So, we traded it all in for this. For freedom, for adventure, and for days that start like this one. We were parked in a small, designated spot on the western shore of Loch Lomond in Scotland. The morning was a masterpiece of grey and silver. A thick mist, the kind the Scots call a har, was draped over the water, softening the edges of the distant hills until they looked like watercolor smudges on a damp piece of paper. The only sounds were the gentle lapping of the loch against the pebbled shore and the faint, mournful cry of a single gull circling somewhere in the milky air. It was profoundly peaceful. Inside the van, however, peace was in short supply. "Have you seen the coffee press?" Karen's voice was muffled. I turned from the window to see her head and shoulders buried deep inside our main food cupboard, a space roughly the size of a microwave. "I think it's behind the oatcakes," I offered, not moving. I knew from experience that intervening in a cupboard search was a fool's errand. There was a faint clatter, followed by a box of herbal tea sliding out and landing on the floor with a soft thud. "Nope. Not behind the oatcakes," she confirmed, emerging with a frustrated sigh and a stray piece of pasta in her hair. "It's gone rogue." I located my right hiking boot, which had somehow migrated overnight to the driver's footwell, and nudged the tea box with my toe. "Maybe it's staging a protest. Demanding a better class of coffee bean." Karen gave me a look that was part amusement, part exasperation. It's a look I've come to know very well in our 75 square feet of living space. It's not just the coffee press, John. It's everything. I tripped over your camera bag this morning, the spare maps have formed a sedimentary layer on the dashboard, and I'm fairly certain a family of spiders has taken up residence in the tangled mess of charging cables by our bed. She planted her hands on her hips, surveying the compact chaos of our home. It wasn't filthy, not by any means. We were clean people. But it was cluttered. A slow, creeping accumulation of stuff had begun to shrink our already tiny world. Every surface held something that should have been somewhere else. It was the entropy of the open road, the inevitable slide from order into a comfortable, but inefficient, jumble. "That's it," she declared, her voice firm with resolve. The mist outside seemed to part a little, as if in deference to her tone. "Today is the day. Operation Reset is officially a go." I let out a soft, theatrical groan. Operation Reset was Karen's term for a full-scale, pull everything out and put it back in better van reorganization. We did it maybe twice a year, and while I always loved the result, I dreaded the process. It felt like moving house, but without the benefit of going anywhere. "But the mist is just starting to lift," I protested weakly. "I thought we could maybe hike a bit of Conic Hill." "We will hike nothing," she said, pointing a finger at me with mock severity. "Until we can find our hiking boots without launching a full-scale search and rescue mission. Today's adventure isn't about conquering a hill, my love. It's about conquering this. It's about making sure our freedom doesn't get buried under a pile of stuff we don't need." She was right, of course. She usually is when it comes to the practicalities of this life. The freedom of the road is a beautiful concept, but it's built on a very practical foundation of organization and efficiency. When that foundation starts to crack, the whole structure feels wobbly. So, let me tell you, this might not be a story of breathtaking vistas or ancient castles, but it's one of the most important kinds of stories from this life on the road. It's about the nuts and bolts. It's the story of how we fight back against the chaos, and how Karen, with her surprising, almost magical methods, keeps our tiny home a sanctuary and not a storage locker. This is the story of Operation Reset. The first step of Operation Reset was always the most daunting. Karen called it the Great Ejection. It was exactly what it sounded like. We laid a large, durable tarp on the damp grass next to the van, a splash of blue against the green and grey of the Scottish landscape. And then, we started to empty the Wanderer. Everything came out. First, the big things, our folded camp chairs, the portable solar panel, the emergency toolkit. Then the bedding, duvet, pillows, and sleeping bags were piled high, forming a soft, temporary mountain. Then came the contents of the cupboards. Tins of beans and chopped tomatoes rolled gently on the tarp. Bags of rice and pasta were stacked like sandbags. Our entire collection of mismatched mugs, accumulated from various market stalls across Europe, was carefully lined up in a row. "Are we sure we need this many mugs?" I asked, holding up a particularly garish one from Prague that depicted a cartoon mole holding a beer stein. "Every mug tells a story," Karen replied, her voice firm as she wrestled with a stack of foldable silicone bowls. "That one tells the story of the time you tried to order 2 beers in Czech and ended up with a plate of pickled cheese." "A fine cheese it was, too," I mumbled, placing the mug back with its brethren. She had a point. The process was relentless. Out came the clothes, sorted into 2 piles, hers and mine. Out came the books, the maps, the toiletries, the cleaning supplies. The small drawer that we affectionately called the drawer of everything was upended, spilling a chaotic treasure trove onto the tarp: spare batteries, a half-used tube of superglue, 3 different kinds of insect repellent, a single, sad-looking glove, loose change from 4 different countries, and a corkscrew we thought we'd lost in Portugal. Within an hour, our van was a hollow shell. An echoey, empty box. And outside, on the blue tarp, sat our entire life. It looked like the world's most personal and eclectic yard sale. A passing couple walking their border collie slowed down, gave us a quizzical look, and then hurried on, probably suspecting we were being evicted by some sort of hyper-efficient Scottish bailiff. I stood back and looked at the pile. It was honestly overwhelming. "I don't believe it," I said, shaking my head. "How does all of this mountain of stuff, possibly fit in there?" I gestured from the chaotic heap to the serene emptiness of the van. "It defies the laws of physics." "It doesn't defy physics, it just defies logic," Karen said, wiping a smudge of dust from her cheek. She looked less like a van dweller and more like a field marshal surveying a battlefield. She was in her element. "The problem isn't the amount of stuff. The problem is how we've been living with it. We've been living in piles, not in systems." She picked up a small, hand-carved wooden bird from the pile. I'd bought it from a craftsman in the Black Forest in Germany. It was beautiful, but it had spent the last 6 months migrating from the dashboard to a cubbyhole to the top of the microwave. It had no home. "This is the culprit," she said, holding it up. "And this," she added, picking up my bulky telephoto lens that I rarely used but insisted on keeping, just in case. "And definitely this," she pointed to a thick, unopened guidebook to southern Italy. We were in Scotland. The challenge was laid bare. It wasn't about a simple spring clean. It was a complete reevaluation of our space and our possessions. The surprise wasn't that we had so much stuff, but that we had managed to function for so long in the disorganized way we had. The journey of the day was clear: to turn this pile of chaos into a serene and functional home once more. And I, the skeptical grunt in this operation, could only watch as my wife, the calm and collected general, prepared to perform her magic. This was the point where I usually became a liability. Faced with the mountain of our possessions, my instinct was to just start shoving things back in wherever they seemed to fit. Karen's approach was, shall we say, more refined. This was where the lecture, always delivered with a smile, began. "Okay," she said, clapping her hands together. Lesson 1, the zone of proximity. "The what now?" I asked, picking up a stray sock. "Everything in the van exists in a zone," she explained, beginning to sort items on the tarp into smaller, more manageable clumps. "There's the kitchen zone. That's everything related to cooking and eating. Pots, pans, plates, cutlery, food. There's the sleep zone. Bedding, pajamas, the books we're currently reading. There's the work and navigation zone. That's the laptop, the chargers, the maps, the guidebooks for places we are actually going to. And finally, the outdoor and utility zone. Hiking boots, raincoats, toolkit, camp chairs. She was moving with incredible speed and purpose, creating 4 distinct islands of stuff on our sea of blue tarp. The golden rule is that an item lives in its zone. You don't store tea towels with the screwdrivers. You don't keep a map of Spain in the food cupboard. It sounds simple, but the moment you let the zones blur, you get chaos. It did sound simple. And yet, I knew for a fact that I had just retrieved a head torch from the bag of pasta. My zones were very much blurred. Lesson 2, she continued, not pausing for breath. The verticality principle. She walked to the van and ran her hand along a bare section of wall between the overhead cupboards and the countertop. This is wasted real estate. We live in a world that is only 5 feet wide, but it's 6 feet tall. We have to think up. From a bag she'd set aside, she produced her secret weapons, a set of lightweight, fabric wall pockets and a roll of heavy-duty Velcro. For the next 20 minutes, we worked together, me cutting the Velcro strips and her carefully positioning the pockets. One went by the sliding door, perfect for shoes, keeping them off the floor. Another went up near our bed, a slim one for holding phones, her reading glasses, and my Kindle. A third, larger one went on the inside of the wardrobe door for holding smaller items of clothing like socks and underwear. See, she said, stepping back to admire her work. We've just created 3 new drawers out of thin air. It was brilliant. Then came the third lesson, which she called the Matryoshka method, named after the Russian nesting dolls. Everything should have something inside it, and everything should fit inside something else, she declared. She demonstrated with our cooking pots, which were already nested, but then she took it to a whole new level. Our collection of silicone bowls was flattened and placed inside the largest pot. The cutlery, bundled in a tea towel, went inside a mug. She showed me how rolling our clothes, rather than folding them, not only saved space but also allowed them to be packed into packing cubes like perfect, colorful sausages. It was a philosophy of compression and containment. But her fourth tip was the one that really hit home for me. It was the one-touch rule. John, come here, she beckoned me to a now empty cupboard. When you wanted that head torch this morning, what did you have to do? I thought about it. Well, I had to move the bag of pasta, then the spare batteries, then a roll of bin bags. Exactly, she cut in. 3 moves to get 1 item. My rule is this: everything you use regularly must be accessible with 1 touch or 1 move. 1. If you have to dig for it, it's in the wrong place or you have too much stuff in front of it. This was the aha moment for me. It was a revelation. It wasn't just about being tidy, it was about the economy of movement, the economy of time and frustration. We weren't just organizing, we were redesigning our life for efficiency. All those little moments of rummaging, of sighing with frustration, they added up. They were tiny pebbles of friction that could, over time, wear down the joy of this lifestyle. Okay, I said, genuinely impressed. I get it. The one-touch rule. I'm on board. Good, she smiled. Because now we come to the hardest, but most important, part. She picked up her tablet from the passenger seat. Lesson 5, Digital Decanting. She saw my confused expression. We can't keep everything, John. Not in the physical world. The ticket stub from that concert in Vienna. The beautiful shell from that beach in Croatia. The brochure from the Carnarvon Castle. They're memories, but they're also clutter. She opened an app on her tablet. It was a digital scrapbook. There were photos, organized by country and date. She navigated to a page for Wales. There was a crisp, high-resolution photo of the brochure from Carnarvon Castle, and next to it, a little text box she had typed up. Visited on a blustery Tuesday. Remember the jackdaws on the ramparts and how we shared that Welsh cake overlooking the harbor. You did a terrible impression of a Welsh accent. We take a picture of the memento, she explained softly. We write down the memory that it triggers. We capture the feeling of the thing, not the thing itself. Then, we let the thing go. She picked up the actual brochure from the pile on the tarp. It was crumpled and a bit faded. She held it for a moment, then looked at me. It's okay to let it go. We have the memory. It's safe in here, she tapped the tablet. And now we have space for a new memory. This was her true genius. It wasn't just about finding clever storage solutions. It was about understanding the difference between a memory and a souvenir. It was a strategy for living a big life in a small space, not by accumulating things, but by accumulating experiences and storing them with care. This was the philosophy that made it all possible. The next 2 hours were a blur of focused, collaborative activity. It was a dance of two people who knew each other's movements intimately, now choreographed by Karen's systems. Armed with the one-touch rule and the zone of proximity, we became a hyper-efficient team. The kitchen zone went in first. The nested pots and pans slid into the lowest cupboard, their former home now occupied by the tins and dry goods, arranged by height like a tiny, well-stocked supermarket shelf. The mugs, including the infamous Czech mole, were secured in their overhead space, each one separated by a small piece of non-slip lining to prevent chipping and rattling. The magnetic spice jars Karen had insisted we buy were filled and clicked satisfyingly onto a metal splashback sheet installed behind our small hob. It looked like something out of a design magazine. I tackled the drawer of everything. Applying Karen's principles, it was transformed into the drawer of specific, useful things. Batteries went into a small, repurposed plastic container. The superglue and a small sewing kit went into another. The tangled mess of cables was tamed with Velcro ties and placed in an old camera lens pouch. The single glove was ceremoniously declared redundant and relegated to the bin bag. The corkscrew was given a place of honor in the cutlery drawer. One touch. I could now open that drawer and retrieve any single item with one touch. It was a miracle. Then came the clothes. Rolled tightly and filed vertically in the packing cubes, they took up almost half the space they had before. When we slid the cubes into their designated cupboards, there was actual, visible empty space left over. I stared at it, dumbfounded. "There's room," I stammered. "I know," Karen said, a triumphant glint in her eye. "Feels weird, doesn't it?" The books were sorted. The Guide to Southern Italy, along with a few others for places far in our future or past, were placed in a deep storage box under the bench seat. The current essentials, Scotland, Northern England, and our favorite birdwatching guide, were slipped neatly into one of the new vertical wall pockets near the front seats. The peak of the experience, the true culmination of our efforts, came with the final item. It was the little wooden bird from the Black Forest. It had been the symbol of our clutter. Karen picked it up from the tarp where it had sat observing our labors all morning. She didn't put it in a cupboard or a drawer. Instead, she took a tiny, sticky-backed hook from her bag of tricks and fixed it to the wooden frame of the window above our small sink. She then hung the bird from the hook by a small loop of twine. It dangled there, perfectly balanced, gently turning in the breeze from the open door. It was no longer clutter. It was art. It had a home, a place where it could be seen and appreciated every single day. When the last item from the tarp was packed away and the tarp itself was folded and stored in its rightful place, we both stood in the middle of the van. The space felt enormous. The air seemed lighter. The lines of the interior were clean and defined. We could both stand, turn around, and not bump into each other. I opened a cupboard door, the one that used to trigger an avalanche of camping gear. Inside, the head torches were nestled in a small basket, easily reachable. The waterproof trousers were rolled neatly next to them. Nothing fell out. I closed it and opened another. The same story. Perfect order. I turned to Karen, and I was genuinely speechless for a moment. All the dread I had felt that morning had evaporated, replaced by a profound sense of calm and gratitude. "You're a magician," I said, my voice full of awe. "A sorceress of storage. A wizard of wardrobe." She laughed, a bright, happy sound that filled our newly spacious home. "I'm just a woman who doesn't like tripping over things." I wrapped my arms around her and pulled her into a hug. "Thank you," I whispered into her hair, which no longer had pasta in it. "This feels incredible." We stood there for a long moment, just holding each other in the center of our clean, orderly, peaceful home. Outside, the last of the mist had burned off, and the afternoon sun was casting a brilliant, silvery light across the surface of the loch. The world outside was vast and beautiful, and for the first time in weeks, our little world inside felt just as expansive. The reset was complete. The feeling wasn't just satisfaction, it was liberation. With the last of the work done, it was time to test the new system. "I'll make us a celebratory cup of tea," I announced, feeling a surge of domestic confidence. The process was a revelation. I opened the cupboard, and the kettle was right there. One touch. The tea bags were in a clearly labeled tin next to it. One touch. The mugs, our beloved story-filled mugs, were secure and accessible. I didn't have to shuffle a single thing. The whole operation, from decision to 2 steaming cups on the table, took less than 3 minutes. It used to be a 5 to 10 minute excavation. We took our mugs and sat on the edge of the sliding doorway, our feet dangling just above the damp Scottish grass. The sun was warm on our faces, and the view across Loch Lomond was utterly sublime. The water shimmered, and the hills, now clear and sharp in the afternoon light, stood like ancient, sleeping giants. "You know," I said, taking a sip of tea, "I genuinely dreaded this morning. I pictured a whole day of grumpy frustration." Karen smiled into her mug. "I know you did. You get that little line between your eyebrows." "But it wasn't like that at all," I continued. "And this," I gestured around the serene interior of the van. "This feeling is worth every second. I feel like I can breathe again." "That's the whole point," she said, her expression turning more thoughtful. "It's about recalibrating our freedom. When the van gets cluttered, it starts to feel like a cage, doesn't it? A tiny, messy cage. Every little task becomes a chore. You lose that sense of effortless mobility that we came out here to find." I nodded, watching a small fishing boat putter across the water, its wake a perfect V on the glassy surface. The one-touch rule. It's brilliant. It's not just about finding the head torch. It's about removing all those tiny points of friction from our day. "Exactly," she agreed. "This life has to be intentional. You can't just drift through it, letting things pile up, physically or mentally. An organized van isn't about being rigid or obsessive. It's the opposite. It's what creates the space for spontaneity. It's a launch pad, not a storage unit." We sat in comfortable silence for a while, just absorbing the peace of the moment, both the peace of the loch and the newfound peace inside our home. I thought about her phrase, a launch pad. She was so right. When we knew exactly where everything was, when our systems were running smoothly, we were more prepared to say yes to the world. Yes to a sudden detour. Yes to an invitation from a fellow traveler. Yes to packing a bag in 5 minutes to go climb a hill because the weather had unexpectedly cleared. The day's most memorable moment for me hadn't been reaching a summit or discovering a hidden waterfall. It had been the simple, profound satisfaction of putting that little wooden bird in its perfect spot. It was the transformation of an object from clutter to art, simply by giving it a home. Our whole van had just undergone that same transformation. It wasn't just a vehicle anymore, it was a home, reset and ready for whatever came next. As the sun began to dip towards the hills, casting long, golden shadows across the landscape, our conversation deepened. We moved from the practicalities of the day to the philosophy that underpins our entire journey. This is what often happens after we complete a big task, whether it's a long drive or a day of van maintenance. The shared effort opens a space for reflection. It's funny, isn't it? I mused, leaning back against the doorframe. Back in our old house, we had a 3-bedroom house, a garage, and a loft. We had entire rooms filled with stuff we hadn't looked at in years. We had more storage space than we knew what to do with, and yet, it never felt as calm as this does right now. Because that space allowed us to be unintentional, Karen replied, her gaze fixed on the horizon. We could just close a door on a mess. We could put things in the loft and forget about them for a decade. We never had to make hard choices about what was truly important because we had the space to keep everything. Here, she patted the floor of the van, we have no choice. This space forces us to be curators of our own lives. Curators of our own lives, the phrase resonated deeply. That's what her system of digital decanting was all about. We weren't just chucking things out, we were carefully selecting which memories to preserve and how to preserve them in a way that didn't weigh us down. In our old life, the weight of our possessions was metaphorical. In the van, it's literal. Every extra kilogram is more fuel, more wear and tear on the suspension, more stuff to rattle and break. That one in, one out rule we try to stick to, I said, it felt like a restriction at first. A sacrifice. But it's not. It's a discipline. It makes you really consider every purchase. Do I truly need this? Does it add more value to my life than the thing I have to give up to make space for it? It's a philosophy for more than just souvenirs, Karen added. It's about living a life of appreciation rather than accumulation. It's about enjoying the things we have instead of constantly wanting more. I thought about how this process was a microcosm of our relationship, especially in this second act of our lives. When we lived in the big house, we had space to retreat from each other, to stew in separate rooms after a disagreement. In the Wanderer, that's not an option. We have to communicate, to compromise, to work as a team. Today was a perfect example. I had to let go of my resistance to the task, and she had to patiently guide me through her vision. We had to literally move around each other, passing things back and forth, working in sync. You can't reorganize a camper van without being a team. You know, I think this is why we work so well out here, I said, reaching for her hand. This life magnifies everything. The frustrations, yes, but also the partnerships. We couldn't do this if we weren't good at solving problems together. And if you weren't willing to admit that my system for rolling socks is objectively superior to your stuffing method, she teased, squeezing my hand. That is a truth I have come to accept, I chuckled. But seriously, your systems, they seem so structured, but what they actually create is the ultimate freedom. Because everything is taken care of, because the foundation is solid, our minds are free to focus on the real adventure. We're not bogged down by the little anxieties of, where is the thingamajig or, how will we fit this in? It's the paradox of the road, discipline creates freedom. Order creates the space for chaos, the good kind of chaos. The spontaneous, joyful, unpredictable chaos of travel. The last sliver of sun disappeared behind the hills, and the sky began to blush with the soft colors of twilight. Our little van, clean and orderly, felt like the safest, most comfortable place on earth. Today we hadn't traveled a single mile, but we had made a journey all the same. We had traveled from chaos to calm, from frustration to function. And in doing so, we had reaffirmed the very core of why we chose this life, to live simply, to live intentionally, and to live it together. With the van reset and our spirits renewed, a fresh wave of excitement for the road ahead washed over us. The contentment of the evening wasn't a sleepy, final kind of peace, it was an energizing one. We were ready. So, Karen said, as we finally retreated inside and closed the sliding door against the cooling evening air. Now that we can actually find the maps, where to next, Captain? I grinned, pulling the relevant, now easily accessible, map from its new wall pocket. I spread it out on our clear, uncluttered table. Well, I was thinking, since we're so beautifully organized, we're in the perfect state to tackle something big. Something epic. I traced a line with my finger, heading north from our current position. What do you say we push on to Fort William, and then start making our way up towards the Highlands? Maybe even, the North Coast 500? Her eyes lit up. The North Coast 500 is one of Scotland's most legendary driving routes, a winding, dramatic journey through some of the most remote and breathtaking coastal scenery in the British Isles. It had been on our list for ages, a someday adventure. Are we ready for that? She asked, a thrill in her voice. We've never been more ready, I said with confidence. The van is purring, the cupboards are orderly, and the driver knows where his spare socks are. We're unstoppable. Tomorrow, we would wake up, make coffee in under 3 minutes, and hit the road with a renewed sense of purpose. We would head north, towards bigger mountains, wilder coasts, and new stories waiting to be gathered. The simple act of organizing our physical space had cleared our mental space, making room for bigger dreams. And that, really, is the secret of this life after 50. It's not just about the grand destinations. It's about tending to the small details that make the grand destinations possible. It's about finding adventure not just on the mountain peaks, but in the quiet satisfaction of a job well done, a home well tended, and a partnership well loved. It's about building a life that is not just free, but functional, peaceful, and always ready for the next horizon. Thanks for joining us on this slightly different kind of adventure today. It wasn't about the miles we traveled, but about the inches we reclaimed. We hope it gave you a little insight into the real, everyday magic of making a life on the road work. Maybe it even inspired you to tackle a cluttered drawer or cupboard in your own home. Join us next time as we point the wanderer north and see what tales the Scottish Highlands have in store for us. Until then, keep dreaming, keep exploring, and as always, keep living fully, 1 mile, and 1 story at a time.